It was just a piece of paper, folded neatly, tucked inside an old leather notebook he hadn't opened in years. But the weight it carried was heavier than anything he'd ever held. That letter, the one he never gave her, still had her name written at the top. Still smelled faintly of the cologne she used to wear, clinging to his memory like a stubborn ghost. Yaman sat alone in his Rome apartment, the city buzzing outside with its usual rhythm, cars honking, tourists laughing, life moving forward without hesitation. But inside those four walls, time had paused. And all he could hear was the silence of everything left unsaid. He wrote it the night after she left. After the argument, after the door slammed shut, after he realized it wasn't just a pause, they were really over. Her words echoed in his mind, but not as much as the way she looked when she turned away. Broken, confused, angry, and hurt. He hadn't meant for it to go that far. He never did. He stared at the page now, the ink slightly faded but still legible. Demet, it began. Simple, direct, personal. No titles, no pretense. Just her name. The way he used to whisper it when they were alone, when cameras weren't watching, when their world still made sense. Back then, love wasn't scripted. It wasn't lines they memorized for a scene. It was messy, raw, and real. It was morning coffees and pajamas, stolen glances during rehearsals, secret touches under the table at press events. They had something rare, something they both knew was bigger than fame, but also something neither of them really knew how to protect. He had tried, in his own way. Flowers, messages, late-night calls. But the industry didn't make it easy. Rumors. Jealousy. The pressure to be perfect even when they were crumbling behind the scenes. And slowly, what began as passion turned into pressure. What once felt like home began to feel like a battlefield. He remembered the day he wrote the letter vividly. It was raining in Istanbul. He hadn't left the apartment in 2 days. His phone was filled with missed calls, but none from her. And that silence drove him to the edge. So he picked up a pen, hoping that if he couldn't talk to her, at least he could bleed onto paper. I never knew how to love you right, the letter read. You were always light, and I was always chasing shadows. You smiled at the world, and I questioned it. I wanted to protect you, but I ended up building walls between us. And now that you're gone, I finally understand the sound of emptiness. He never mailed it. Never handed it to her during the few awkward encounters they had months later. It just stayed with him, through new roles, new cities, even new relationships. None of which ever quite touched the part of his heart where she still lived. And now, years later, with his fame even bigger, with fans shouting his name in languages he barely understood, it was that letter he kept coming back to. That version of himself who had the courage to write the truth, but not enough to say it out loud. He had thought about her more than he admitted. Even to himself. Whenever he visited a set where they used to shoot. Whenever a fan mentioned Erkenci Kuss. Whenever someone asked about love in interviews and he gave a polished, safe answer. Because the real answer still lived in that letter. The one she never read. That night in Rome, something shifted. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the fact that everyone thought he had moved on when in truth, part of him hadn't. He picked up his phone and scrolled through old photos. Her laughter, her eyes, the way she used to look at him when she thought no one was watching. He didn't cry. Not this time. But something inside him softened. And that's when he realized he needed to say it. To finally let the truth out. Not for headlines. Not for gossip. But for peace. He opened a voice recorder on his phone. And with trembling fingers, he began to speak, reading the letter out loud for the first time. Demet, his voice cracked as he began. If you're hearing this, it means I finally found the courage I never had before. He paused, the silence hanging thick in the air. He hadn't practiced this. He hadn't rehearsed what to say. But maybe that's what made it real. For the first time in years, he wasn't acting. He was just. A man who had loved deeply and lost even deeper. You once asked me why I always pulled away when things got serious, he continued. I said I was busy. I said it was the pressure. The fans. The press. But that wasn't the full truth. The truth is, I was scared. You saw parts of me that no one else had ever seen. And it terrified me. He remembered one night, back in 2019. They had just wrapped shooting. They were exhausted but happy. She had her head on his shoulder, and they were talking about dreams. Not career dreams, but real ones. Where they wanted to live. Whether they wanted kids. And for a moment, he had pictured it all, her in a kitchen dancing barefoot, their child's laughter echoing in the next room. But instead of leaning in, he pulled back. He made a joke. She laughed, but her eyes were disappointed. She knew. She always knew when he was hiding. I pushed you away every time we got close because I didn't think I deserved it, his voice said on the recording. You were always brighter, kinder, softer than me. I didn't know how to accept something that good without fearing I'd destroy it. He stood up and walked to the window. Rome glittered beneath him, but he didn't see it. All he saw was her walking away that last night. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't begged. She just looked at him one last time and left. And he stood there, holding every word he should have said. I used to think love was enough, he continued. But love needs truth. And I wasn't brave enough to give you mine. Not then. The recorder kept running as he sank back into the couch. He whispered details only they would remember, like how she hated cold coffee but always forgot her cup, how she had a nervous habit of tapping her fingers when she was unsure, how she once cried during a rehearsal because the scene reminded her of her real heartbreak. And you know what's the hardest part, he added. You never once made me feel small. Even when I was silent, you waited. Even when I was distant, you stayed close. Until the day you couldn't anymore. His phone buzzed with notifications, but he ignored them. The world outside could wait. This was for her, and for him. He wasn't trying to win her back. That wasn't the point. He knew too much time had passed, and their lives had changed. But the truth had to wait. And carrying it alone for so long had scarred him in ways success never could heal. I saw you at that event in Paris, he confessed. You didn't see me. Or maybe you pretended not to. You were smiling, radiant, but I could tell. You were guarded. Like I had taught you to be. That night in Paris had crushed him. He'd wanted to say something. Anything. But her manager had been beside her, and cameras were flashing. He knew it wasn't the moment. And deep down, he feared it was too late. He looked at the time, 3:41 a.m. Most of the world was asleep. But Ken was wide awake, staring at the ghost of a love he once had but never held tightly enough. He clicked stop on the recorder and listened back. His own voice sounded foreign to him, raw, wounded, honest. And then something inside him clicked. He grabbed his phone, went to her name in his contacts. It was still saved as D. Hartsuit. He hadn't dared touch it for years. He hovered his finger over it, heart racing. Not to call. Not yet. But to do what he should have done long ago. He attached the audio recording to a message. No words, no explanations. Just the truth, in his own voice. He stared at the screen for minutes. His thumb trembling over the send button. One deep breath. He tapped it. Message sent. And just like that, the letter he never gave her, was finally out in the world. What happened next wasn't up to him. The moment he hit send, everything went still. It was as if the air itself had stopped moving. Yaman leaned back against the couch, staring at the screen, watching as the message status changed from sent to delivered. But there was no reply. Not that minute. Not that hour. And when the sun began to rise over Rome, washing the city in a golden haze, Ken was still awake, still staring at that same message thread, still hoping, but also preparing himself for silence. Because maybe she wouldn't respond. Maybe the past belonged in the past. Maybe that letter, finally spoken, wasn't for reconciliation, but for release. He closed his eyes and let his memories take over. He remembered their first audition. She was wearing jeans and a plain white tee. No makeup, no filters. Just her. He had looked at her and thought, this is going to be dangerous. And it was. From the moment they met, it had always felt too intense, too big, too fast. He remembered the way she laughed at his dumbest jokes. The way she'd scold him for being late, only to forgive him the moment he kissed her on the forehead. He remembered her scent, jasmine and something else he could never quite name. He remembered falling in love in between takes, in cars, in elevators, in hotel lobbies. And he remembered losing her. People thought they broke up because of work. That the fame had been too much. But it wasn't that simple. It was about timing. About two people who loved each other deeply but didn't know how to love themselves enough to make it last. By noon, he had convinced himself she wouldn't respond. That she'd listen, maybe cry, maybe even smile sadly, but she'd move on. And maybe that was okay. But then, his phone buzzed. Just once. He looked down. Voice message from D. Hartsuit. His heart stopped. He hesitated. Was he ready to hear her voice again? To hear what she really thought? To reopen a wound that never truly healed? He tapped play. Her voice came through, soft and shaking. I didn't think you still had it, she began. The letter. She paused. He could hear her breathing in, gathering strength. I always wondered what you would have said if you had just spoken. Just once. Not as the Can everyone sees, but as you. The man I knew late at night, when it was just us. Her voice cracked slightly. I waited. Longer than you know. I told myself you'd call. That maybe you'd show up one day, no cameras, no scripts, just you. But you never did. And I thought, maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe it wasn't real. Can's eyes filled with tears. But it was real, she continued. Your letter proved that. And hearing your voice again, it brought everything back. She paused again, longer this time. I don't know if we can go back. Too much has changed. We've changed. I'm not the same girl you left, and maybe you're not the same man. But thank you, for finally saying what you couldn't say then. I needed to hear it. I think a part of me was still waiting. Silence. Then she added, barely above a whisper, I kept something too. A letter. Mine. Maybe it's time I send it to you. The message ended. Ken didn't move for a long time. His chest ached, not from sadness, but from something else. Closure? Hope? He wasn't sure. He went to his kitchen, made a coffee, and stood there holding the cup with both hands. Everything outside looked the same, but inside, something had shifted. Later that night, he got another message. An image. A picture of a handwritten letter, folded in the shape of a heart. Beneath it, a caption, now you know. You weren't the only one who couldn't say it. He stared at the photo for minutes. Then smiled. Not a fake one. A real one. The kind he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what would come next. Whether they'd meet again, talk again, begin something again, or whether this was the last page in a book that finally found its ending. But for the first time since she left, he felt peace. Because the letter he never gave her had finally found its way home. And with it, maybe, so had he.